I tend to learn the hard way. One of those pastors invited me to have a cup of coffee sometime. Although I quickly agreed a year later, I hadn't bothered to take him up on his invitation. Something happened that reminded me of his offer, and guiltily I called him and invited him to have lunch. Over lunch, I said, "Fred, about a year ago you invited me to have a cup of coffee. If I'm not mistaken, what you were really asking me to do is pursue a friendship. I didn't do it. I don't really have an excuse. I could make something up, but I'd be lying. I just didn't do it. I'm busy, but I'm no busier than you are. I just didn't do it. And I'm sorry. Would you be willing to forgive me? Could we start all over?" Now, this guy lived 2 doors down from me at the time. I saw him cutting his grass, working in his yard, coming and going, but I couldn't find time for a cup of coffee. He could not have been more gracious. Fred said, "Sure. No need to even ask. All is forgiven." Then later, during lunch, he invited me to go with him and his wife on a missions trip to Zambia. Our church had been doing some missions work in Kenya, but I'd never been to Zambia. I had no plans to go to Zambia. But a network is not a network. A friendship is not a friendship, unless it goes both directions. So I said, "Let me see what I can do. I'll have to find the money, and we've never done anything in Zambia, but let me see. I'll call you." He told me later that he never expected to hear from me. I went back to the church and found the money to go with him to Zambia, because a network is not a network. A friendship is not a friendship, unless it flows both ways. When I went to Zambia, I learned some pretty important lessons. I discovered that my charismatic friend knew far more about missions than anybody in our church. His staff had developed a sophisticated strategy of accountability that was way over my head. And more importantly, we became fast friends. A couple of years ago, the tsunami hit. Hope Church felt compelled as a community of faith to collect an offering to distribute to those whose lives were devastated by this tragic disaster. Only then did I realize we really had no way of distributing the money. We had no contacts in the devastated areas. But my charismatic friend Fred, who pastored a church so different in theology and doctrine from my own, had been working with 20 churches in Sri Lanka for years. I called Fred and said, "We've collected some money for these people who were hurt so badly by the tsunami, but we don't really have a good vehicle to distribute the money. I know you're going to Sri Lanka in a couple of weeks. Would you mind if we sent some money with you?" He said, "I wouldn't mind at all." So I met Fred at Starbucks and gave him a check for $120,000. When Fred saw the check, he stuttered. "Am I reading this right? Or did they put too many zeros on the check?" I said, "No, you got it right." He said, "I'm flabbergasted. A Presbyterian church writing a check to an independent, charismatic church? You are going with us. You are going to oversee the expenditure of the money, aren't you?"